Okay, team, video number 3 of week 5. We're in the home stretch. This is the last video, these last 2 chapters of the class. We're going to cover project closure. No, how do you close down a project now that you've completed it? And then we'll go through chapter 15, talking about agile project management. So, as we take a look at our journey, uh, you know, introduction, we've defined the project, we've done estimation, we've done work breakdown structures, networks, we've managed the risks, you've scheduled resources, you determine costs, you've compressed schedules and optimized the schedule. You've been monitoring the progress, and now you're done and you're ready to close down the project. Remember, a project, beginning start, beginning end date. That's the definition of a project. So, what are some of the things you do closing down a project? Well, what we're going to talk a little bit about in this chapter is different reasons you close down a project. There are multiple different reasons you close down a project. There's some challenges associated with closing down a project. We're going to talk about that. There's a concept of a project audit. Um, did you perform what you said you were going to perform and deliver as part of the project? We'll talk a little bit about retrospective. Retrospectives means, you go back in and you look at your project, how you ran it, how the team reacted, how the team handled risks, deliverables, etc., and identify areas of lessons learned. How can we improve going forward? So, we talked a little bit about project management maturity. Now, every company has a different level of maturity when it handles projects. Some projects are very new to running projects. Some projects or some companies are very mature with firm processes, templates, tools, training, and have evolved over time to be very effective project management teams. We're going to talk about a maturity model. We're going to talk a little bit about, how do you assess a team and individuals' performance on a project? So we'll talk about all these different areas when it comes to closing down a project. So when we take a look at project closure, there's some wrap up activities we have to perform. We may need to um, deliver final products to a customer. We maybe have to do demonstrations. There may be vendors we have to close down invoicing and payments. We may generate final wrap up or closure reports. How did we perform? We may do audits, retrospectives, lessons learned. We may have to evaluate how the team performed and how future projects can be improved. We may have to provide feedback on how individuals on your project team performed. Remember, as project manager, you were a leader. Many projects, the individuals are pulled from various different departments, brought onto a project team to accomplish the project goals. At the end of that project, those individuals go back to their departments. Their managers, their functional managers on their departments, may want feedback from you as a project leader or manager. How did they perform in their task? And then, as we'll talk about the maturity model, often all this information gets into a project or a repository or database or archive. So when the next project starts, the project manager and the team can review what the previous team did, what they did right, what they did wrong, how can they improve and continuously improve the process. So let's talk a little bit about why would a project close? Well, many different ways. Um, Normal. That seems pretty normal, but a project completed what it was supposed to complete. Therefore, there's no reason the team needs to continue working. There are times in which it's premature. Well, we thought this team was going to be together 12 months to deliver this, but we're wrapping it up in 9 months. Now, premature could be, well, we finished early. Great. Everybody seems, celebrates and you finish early and you celebrate. It could be the project is way behind schedule, so they decided to terminate. It's not worth investing the rest of the funds for resources to complete. It could be the market change. The company no longer needs this project for competitive reasons. So there are many reasons why a project could end early. Now, um, on the opposite is perpetual. This is when a project continues and it seems like it's going on forever. Now, you see this often when a project gets a lot of changes, additional scope. What was supposed to be a 6 months project turned 9 months, no, 12 months, 18 months. It just continues. There comes a point where you have to close down the project because it's not adding additional value. No, it failed. No, technology couldn't work. Vendors didn't perform. There are reasons why project fails. And when they do, you need to be able to close down the project, release resources, close down the financials, etc. And then, often things change. When you take a look at a project that's 12 months long or 18 months, a lot can change from a business perspective in that time. So sometimes if priorities change, projects are deprioritized, they are stopped. New projects are started up. That happens a lot in the business. There's many different reasons why a project can change. Now, so what are some of the wrap up activities? Um, One of the key activities when you're closing down a project is getting acceptance by the customer. Now, over this period of time, you were building out this project, you were creating deliverables for a stakeholder, for a customer, for a client. At the end of the project, um, you're providing those deliverables to that customer. You want to ensure they are accepting it. It meets their requirements. You're able to invoice for the project. The project is, if it's an internal project, it's completed and the internal stakeholder accepts it and moves on. No, that's one of the critical areas. Now, your team. You could have a team of 6, 10, 50, 200 people on your project. As you're starting to shut it down, you got to start releasing those team members either back to their departments to resume their normal work or to other projects. So part of a project closure is ensuring you start rolling the people back to their homes or other areas. Now, if this is a project for a client, you may need to ensure that, all of the project is accepted and the client is being invoiced and you're being paid for the work. Now, part of the role of the financial or project manager is the finances. You're managing the company's money to drive value. Um, Obviously, you're delivering the project to the customer, internal, external, and then typically you create a final report. This is what we accomplished. This was the cost. These were the risks. Here's what was delivered to be able to complete up. So it ties everything off. So when the company does another project like this, It can learn from previous mistakes. These are often the different areas you have to do in order to drive project closure. Now, many companies and many project managers builds a checklist. If you're doing similar types of projects, you might as well have a standard template you can follow through to make sure everything is complete. Have the resources been transferred? Any rental equipment agreements have been closed out? Have the final projects been completed? Did you do all the performance reviews on the vendors, etc.? These are some good ways to make it easier when you're doing project after project to be able to have a standard template to be able to complete things. Now, often you do, and I roll ahead. Yeah. Often you have to do project audits. If you're doing governmental jobs, Department of Defense, Department of Energy, local government, you often have to create and do a product audit. So, at the beginning of a project, you've created your requirements, your scope, your contracts. At the end of the project, did you accomplish everything you stated you're going to do at the beginning? That's part of an audit. Now, philosophy is it's not a witch hunt. You're pulling in the project team. You want to make sure you keep all the emotion and reaction out of it. It's really a goal and a time to go back and look at what the team did well, what are the areas they need to improve upon. It's not a witch hunt. It's not to say Bobby in procurement really messed up and it costs thousands of dollars more for this project than it should have. It isn't. It's really about a learning exercise. So no, we'll talk a little bit about project audits and we'll talk about retrospectives. Often companies, especially for internal projects, treat those the same, where retrospective is just looking back to see how we can do this better the next time. So when we take a look at you know, the auditing process. You need to make sure you got the right staff included. You have to collect the information, your requirements, your metrics, all those earn value metrics we saw in the last chapter are captured, and you're generating a final report on what was accomplished, how the team performed, what was the project, metrics upon completion. Okay. Now, so when you take a look at like an audit report or a closure report, it's almost like a self-standing overview or summary of 12 months or 18 months or however long the project lasted work. What type of project? What was the size? How much it cost? Number of staff? Any technology, strategy it aligned to? What were your objectives around scope, schedule, cost, quality? What were some of the major risks you encountered that you had to mitigate? What were some of the corrective actions you had to take? What are some of the lessons learned you made throughout the project, and how do you address that going forward? And then all of the data associated with it. So think of this as an overarching report on how the project went. So that'd be the equivalent of me saying, well, class, you just took 5 weeks of project management, summarize that into a 3-page paper, tell me everything you learned about project management in a summary at the end of the class. That's basically what a project summary is. Everything that you've learned throughout the project. Now, retrospectives are very similar to an audit, but a retrospective is more focused on what we learn to improve projects going forward. The book talks about independent trained facilitators doing this. I'll be honest, I've done projects for over 35 years. Typically, retrospectives are done by the team to be able to improve. When we talk about agile, you're doing a retrospective every 2 weeks. So picture every 2 weeks you're completing work and then you pull together and figure out what worked, what didn't work, what could we do better, and then you do the next 2 weeks. And then you're repeating that cycle. So you're continuously improving and getting better. That's the purpose of a retrospective. Often in projects, like ones we've been talking about, you either do it at the end of a project to see, well, what could we have done better over the 12 months? Um, some teams do it at different phases. So after I've done my requirements, or after I've done my design, or after I've done my development, do a retrospective. And you can do them many different ways, but the purpose is to periodically touch base with the team to have a very proactive discussion on what you can do better. Now, a lot of times, um, teams do it in questionnaires. So, no, a survey monkey or etc., where it's a list of various different questions going out to the team members and they fill in the responses. Now, these questionnaires are great because we all know when we pull people together, you'll have some people talk and others not. This keeps anonymity. It allows everybody to have a voice in what could be done better. So just think about it. Now, don't go crazy. Don't send out questionnaires every week or every 2 weeks, but it's a great tool to be able to get anonymous information and data from a team. Okay. So when you look at these retrospectives, you really have to look at it from two different perspectives. One, the process, where the schedules and the scopes met, where the objectives met, how did contractors perform? They're more process oriented. The other is really around culture. Now, um, did we have senior management support? Um, did we have the training needed to be successful? So when you look at a project, you have to look at it from different perspectives because part of the project closure is being able to go back to your sponsor and say, listen, Bob, Mr. CEO, we didn't have enough training. We didn't have full support. We had to escalate problems. So you have to look at really kind of holistically from a process as well as from a cultural perspective as we go forward. We'll talk a little bit more about culture when we get to the maturity model, which, wow, it appears next in the slides. So if you look at the maturity models, every company operates differently. There are some companies that are just starting to do projects and formalize projects. There are some companies that have project management offices, dedicated project managers. That's what they do, and the whole gambit in between. The PMI, the Project Management Institute, has a maturity model, an operational project maturity model called OPM that talks about the different levels of a company. Now, if you look at any maturity model, it's a level 1 to a level 5. Level 1 means everything's ad hoc. There's no templates, there's no standards. It's a free for all. It's really, doesn't have a lot of process around project management, all the way up to a level 5 where they will have project management offices, templates, dedicated project managers. They'll have feedback mechanisms. They do retrospectives. They do audits. And every company falls within the spectrum. That doesn't mean every company could be a level five. Many successful companies operate on a level three or even a level two. It's all goes back to um, the types of projects a company runs, how often they do project work, what are the requirements from the customers around controls. Now, if you were a company doing a lot of work for DoD, then you may have to operate at a four or even a five level. If you're doing mainly projects inside of a company and you're just trying to make it better for the employees and the processes, you may be able to operate at a level two and be very successful. But it all goes back to the different domain areas and knowledges. So if you look at a maturity model, it's based upon the various different domains. How does a company handle scope management, time management, cost management, quality, resource management? And if you don't have processes in place or repeatable processes, you're going to be a lower level, level one. If you have organized and instituted standards and templates, you're up to a level three. If you have optimized everything well defined, you may be as high as level five. But maturity models really look at the different areas of domain and how mature they are. And often companies can go from a level one to a level two and level three, but it does take a little time. Most companies I've worked with, I've taken from a level one to a level three. It can take a year, 2, 3 years to improve that level. But the higher level you go, up to level three and four, the more efficient a company is, the more profitable a company can be. You typically see 10 to 20% profit improvements by maturing a level. So, if you guys are in companies that don't have a lot of things organized, and you can help build out standards and templates and best practices, you can save and generate the company a lot of funding just by improving how you're doing project management. Okay, so um, a lot of times um, you're going to do implementation or post-implementation evaluations. So basically what this means, your project is complete. You need to go back in and assess how the project team performed. Did it operate as a cohesive team? Was communication solid? Did you meet the requirements? How did the individuals perform? So often you have to go back in and do an evaluation of the team. Um, you know, when you're doing this, you really have to take a look at how you're performing that. And so when I talk about team evaluation and we talk about the individual evaluations, the one thing to be very careful on, different companies have different HR requirements on what a project manager should and should not do. Some companies, you're required to do a review on how the team performed, areas they can improve, who are the high contributors, who didn't contribute on a team. Um, there are some companies that the HR department wants specific feedback on the individuals within your team. Did Bob, the developer, participate well? Did they meet their objectives? Did they deliver all of their accomplishments on time? How did they interact? So before you go off and start doing team reviews, individual reviews, work with your HR department to see if that's your role and that's how a company performs. So, sometimes, when I running a team, as the project closes down, I'm sending the resources back to their managers. Their managers will pull me in to give them feedback for their annual performance review. No, I lent you Bobby for 6 months to do development. How did he do? Give me feedback and recommendations. So think of it as almost joint leadership over a team. So, but definitely talk to HR before you go off and do anything directly. Okay. So covered couple different areas in here. We talked about lessons learned. We talked about audits. We talked about some of the steps in project closure. We went through at a high level maturity models, what a retrospective is. A 360 review is strictly that, looking at how a individual performs to their leader, to their subordinates, to their peers, from a 360-degree perspective. And we also talked about a project closure checklist. So we covered a lot of different areas in this chapter, but these are some of the steps it takes to close down a project and to allow teams to move back to their functional teams or to new projects and to wrap things up. Okay, well, team, we are down to the last chapter that we're going to be covering tonight and in this class, chapter 15 around agile project management. And I have to admit, this is one of my favorite topics. Agile's been around for 20 years now. Agile was formed back in 2003 as a way to improve the efficiency of project management. How do you make project management more effective? Over the 20 years, Agile project management has definitely evolved. In 2011, scaled Agile came about, which is how do you take that flexibility and expand it to teams of 100, 1,000, 5,000 people? And I think the biggest scaled Agile project I've been on and led was almost 3,700 people across 89 themes or value streams. So agile projects can become very, very big, and there's special ways to run these. And we talked about certifications. The CAPM, the PMP. There's a whole set of certifications around agile project management, and I'll give you a link in here to talk more about those if you're interested. So when we talk about it, what we're going to accomplish over the next 20 minutes is a little bit about differences between project management, what you've been learning over the past 5 weeks, versus agile project management. We'll talk about iterations or sprints. Agile breaks things up into 2 week or 3 week or 4 week segments to deliver value. So think of it as a 2 week project. You're perpetually repeating itself to deliver product faster. Now, we'll talk a little bit about agile principles. We'll talk about what a scrum team is. We'll talk a little bit about the predecessor to agile, which is called extreme programming, which was actually started in the 1990s, probably before some of you were even born. Extreme programming, I've implemented it at a couple teams back in the mid 90s. It was a great way of reducing defects and improving quality of products. We'll talk about Kanban, which is another way of organizing work going to a team. So a little misnomer is around agile. Agile is actually multiple different ways of running a project based upon the type. You can do Scrum, you can do iterative, you can do scaled, you can do extreme, you can do Kanban. So think of all this as different tools in your toolkit to help improve the efficiency of a team. And we'll wrap it up with some of the limitations of Agile. There are some challenges when you implement an Agile team. And ECPI will start introducing Agile classes starting, I believe, in the spring. So if you're interested in this area, definitely take a look out for those. I'm very excited about this. I've been an Agile consultant for many years, implementing Agile at companies. It is a very exciting, high growth, high opportunity area for project managers, often called Scrum Masters, to be able to run initiatives. Okay, so let's deep dive into it. So let's talk about the differences. The traditional approach to project management, what we've been studying over the past 5 weeks, puts, as you can tell, a lot of effort up front on planning. You initiate, you do all the planning, your work breakdown structure, your network diagrams, your Gantt charts, your dependencies, your estimation. All that's really done up front before you actually start developing the work or doing the work. Now, it's really based upon the concept of when you start a project, the project sponsors or the company really know what they want. Now, as we know in reality, that's often not true. There are many, many, many times in which an executive really doesn't know what they want. They have a general idea, but not the specifics. So when we take a look at project management, when you initiate a project, you get all the requirements and define it and plan it. It could be 6 months, 9 months, 18 months before the project is completed and they see the results. We all know an awful lot can change in that period of time. So back in 2003, a group of individuals put together the Agile framework or methodology on how to make teams more effective in a set of principles or guiding principles around how to operate. And it really turned the whole world kind of on its head a little bit. It's a different way of looking at it. And we'll talk more about that. So, as I mentioned, sometimes, when we take a look at a project initiating the requirements, once you gather everything you need to deliver, you design everything, you construct everything, you test it, and then you deploy it, it can be 6 months to 2 years before you see the outcome. And that created a lot of challenges for projects that change requirements often. Can you picture, you know, you're here in the construction phase, and then every 2 weeks or every month, somebody gives you a different requirement, and you have to redesign, re-baseline, reschedule, look at risks, do your network diagrams, your project planning every 2 weeks. That can become a lot of overhead. So principles around agile are pretty straightforward. You focus on the highest priority for the customer first. It makes common sense. If Sally, the CEO, wants a website and her highest priority is to show new products, That's the highest priority. That's what you focus on first. And the goal is to continuously deliver some value. So even if a project takes 18 months, the goal is to be able to deliver pieces of it early and throughout the project, throughout the timeline, to be able to increase value and show working solutions earlier. Now, big differences in agile, well, you can change, because we're doing things every 2 weeks or 3 weeks. If something changes, it doesn't matter. It only changes the next 2 or 3 weeks. It doesn't change everything. So this becomes a very big pivoting difference when it comes to project management. It does add a little caveat, which means, a sponsor can change things every 2 weeks. That can be kind of hard to manage, but this is set up to be able to handle that. Um, the goal is each sprint or iteration, an iteration lasts 2 to 4 weeks. At the end of that period of time, you're delivering something working, and that's the goal. You're also putting your project team and business very close together. They are working daily throughout the project, which is very different than waterfall. Now, um, the main goal of Agile is to deliver the deliverables as soon as possible and often and no, typically every 2 weeks. Um, the foundation really is, and this is the one, people kind of look at me funny when I say, the goal of Agile is the art of maximizing the work not to be done. Because if you're only focusing on the highest priority items, then everything else isn't high priority. You don't do it. You only focus on the highest priority goal first. Everything else doesn't matter. So the only thing you're working on is what's important. Everything else doesn't count. It waits. Um, and um, because the team is working in 2 week cycles and looking at retrospectives, how they improve, they are self organizing, they become more efficient each sprint. So they're able to deliver more because they operate well together. So these are the foundations behind Agile. So when you take a look at Agile works very, very well if people really don't know the exact details of what they want delivered, or if the technology is not fully known. You don't know how you're going to solve this. So those areas work very well when it becomes unpredictable or unknown. Agile works very well. If you know exactly what the customer wants to the T, you know exactly how you're going to do it and implement it, then waterfall works great. So based upon the type of project, you can alternate between waterfall and agile. So there's some side-by-side differences. Agile or the waterfall method, you do all your design up front, you're fixed on your scope, you know exactly what your deliverables are, you try to freeze the design down early as possible so you can start developing. You don't like changes. Everything is very certain. You don't have to interact with your customer very often. And you can leverage conventional project teams. Now, agile, if you need flexibility, your requirements are changing, there's uncertainty, you need to be able to get more information from the customer on a quicker or more frequent basis. Agile works exceptionally well. Okay, so when you take a look at Agile, We talked about sprints or iterations. Most iterations occur in 2 to 4 weeks. And the goal of that 2 weeks is to actually develop something, to get the requirements, to design it, to develop it, to test it, and to be able to deploy it into production in 2 weeks. So you're working a little bit smaller pieces, incremental, and every 2 weeks you're cranking out new features, new capabilities. At the end of that 2 weeks, you're doing a demonstration to your stakeholder, your customer, showing what progress you made. And then together, you plan the next 2 weeks. So you're constantly planning 2 weeks at a time on how to deliver a product. Now, here's an example. The book provides. I don't necessarily like the tire example, but I mean, think of it more as a website. So let's say a project starts. These iterations are 2 weeks long. At the end of each 2 weeks, you're delivering something, you're improving the value, you're improving features, you're getting better until you finally get to your end product and you're delivered what the customer wants and they don't see more value by keeping the word. Um, Finance teams do like agile because the cost is a fixed price. If you have 6 people working on a team for 2 week segments, then you know exactly how much labor you're spending every 2 weeks. And you simply look at what is the value they're providing and when have they provided enough value, you can close down the team. So that's a good advantage to Agile. If this bicycle wheel is good enough, guess what? You can stop it there. You don't need to do a high performance off-road tire. So it just gives you a different perspective. Now, um, the advantages, you're continuously developing, verifying, and evolving the product every 2 to 4 weeks. Every 2 to 4 weeks, you're doing a demonstration and you're getting customer feedback or stakeholder feedback every 2 weeks. You start seeing defects and problems earlier and can correct earlier. You're not 6 months after you design something, find a problem. So this gives you better feedback on more of an ongoing basis. Now, we talked a little bit about different kinds of agile. A Scrum team. Scrum team is basically a group of 6 to 12 people that work together as a team to deliver capabilities. Now, why they're 6 to 8 is because that's the optimum size. So, they've looked at statistically larger teams, smaller teams, and that team of about 6 to 12 or 8 to 12 is the most optimal size for a team to deliver. If it gets too big, there becomes problems. If it's too small, you may not have the skill sets. Um, there are multiple different methodologies around that. Some of the most popular ones, are Scrum teams, those 6 to 8 teams, extreme programming. Um, is really not used that much anymore. That was very popular in the 1990s. Agile is probably um, the most used technology or methodology. Agile is when you take a Scrum team and apply them to a very big project. So what happens if you have a project that's so big, 6 or 8 people can't do? Now, you can't get the team bigger, it becomes ineffective. So you create multiple Scrum teams. And that's what Agile addresses. How do you handle bigger and bigger teams with more moving parts? How do you integrate them, plan them, have them work together? And I put a link here to the Agile framework. Feel free to go into this is the gold standard on how to operate at all levels a larger enterprise uh, agile implementation. You can create agile trains with multiple teams. You have ongoing integration cycles. You line up your strategic goals of the company. This walks top down on the different areas of how to implement agile at a large company. And gee, uh, are there certifications? Oh, absolutely. There's about 15 different certifications you can get around Agile. You know, how to be a Scrum Master, which is the equivalent of a project manager. If you're an architect, how do you implement them for bigger teams? How do you handle financial management of bigger teams? This is a very solid pathway to learn if you're interested in becoming involved more in agile. And if any of you guys have questions on that or want to know what certifications are better or worse for you, let me know. Um, I've been working with scaled agile since the very beginning, and I am a certified consultant on agile. So I've implemented it at multiple different teams, ranging upward to teams of almost 4,000 individuals. Um, it is a great career, a lot of different roles. If you're interested in software, technology, definitely look into this. I'm happy to give you some guidance through that. Okay, so agile principles, very simple. You focus on the customer. You deliver incremental value. You can experiment, do proofs of concepts, proofs of value in 2 weeks to determine does it make sense to go forward or not. You're self-organizing teams. So your teams working very closely together and improving how they operate, and they're focused on continuous improvement. Okay. Um, Scrum teams, we've talked about that. Groups of 6 to 8. The way they operate are very simple. Let's say you have a large project. You broke down your work breakdown structure just in large deliverables. That goes into a backlog. Then your project manager or your scrum master works with the stakeholder or the project sponsor, and you prioritize which feature, which deliverable has the greatest value. Then you start working on only that. You design it, you do the analysis, you build it, you test it, you meet daily to check on progress at the end of 2, 3, or 4 weeks, whatever a sprint is, and you do a demonstration. Then you start the cycle again. You pick the next highest priority off the list and you go back through this cycle. And the team literally has what's called daily stand ups, where the entire 6 to 12 person team pulls together. John, what are you working on today? What are your blockers? What are you trying to accomplish? And you go around the room and you actually run it on a daily basis. They're typically 15, 20 minutes long to get the teams running to make sure everybody can accomplish what they need to for that day to achieve the 2 week goal. Okay. When you take a look at Scrum, there are different roles. You guys have heard about a project manager. So that's what this class is about. In Agile, the equivalent of a project manager is called a Scrum Master. So a Scrum is a team of 6 to 12 people. So a project manager is just over those 6 or 12 people to be able to deliver every 2 weeks what the team needs to deliver. Um, Therefore your development team. You also have what's called a product owner. Now, often it becomes very difficult to meet with a project sponsor, a director, a vice president, a CEO of a company on a daily basis. Often they will identify what's called a product owner to make decisions on their behalf. An individual that understands the business, understands the goal, and can work directly with you as a project manager and the team to make and develop the accomplishments. So a product owner is a sort of a role between the business side and a project team that interfaces to the owners and the leaders of the company, to the project teams, to ensure the project manager knows exactly what needs to be delivered. Um, Product owner roles are very exciting roles within a company. So, if this is a technology company, you don't want to be technical, then that's a great role. You can have one foot on the business and one foot on the technology side, and it's a great role to be in. So, as we discussed, no, every 2 weeks, you plan what needs to be accomplished for the 2 weeks. You meet daily. At the end of that 2 weeks, you review what you accomplished. You do a demonstration. You go back in and plan the next 2 weeks. And just because it's agile doesn't mean you don't have metrics. In agile, you have what's called a burn down chart. So let's say over the 2 weeks of a sprint, you want to accomplish these items. Each day, you decrement down what you've completed to ensure you're on track, ahead of schedule, or behind schedule for that 2 weeks. So again, just think of it as your project schedule, what you're looking at in 2 week chunk. Um, when you get into larger initiatives that span months and quarters and even up to years, you do quarterly planning where you plan out what are you going to accomplish over the next 6 sprints. Remember, a sprint is about 2 weeks, so 6 sprints is about 1/4 worth of deliverables. So in scaled agile, you plan out every 3 months, and the teams operate every week to accomplish the goal. And you can see a burn down of things being accomplished, whether you're ahead or behind schedule. Okay, we'll talk a little bit about these other areas. We talked about extreme programming. That is the predecessor to Agile, was very popular back in the 1990s. It was really good where it aligned two developers together working on the same problem so that you have two sets of eyes looking at the development, the coding, the programming to reduce defects. And that was a great way of improving quality of software back 30 years ago. It still is. If you can implement paired programming or buddy programming, your quality will go up, your defects will go down. Now, Kanban is a little different. Kanban, think of a customer support team. They're getting all these requests coming in on a daily basis, 20, 30, 40, 50 requests a day. And you take that work, you put it into a big queue, and you plan out 2 weeks at a time what are the highest priority items to do in your backlog, and you put it onto a whiteboard. No, things that you plan to do, things that you're currently working on, and things you've completed. And you're constantly going through that cycle. As you clean up your board over the 2 weeks, you can go back in and get more items off the backlog and put onto the board. So it's just a way of handling a lot of inbound requests. So production support teams, teams that handle defects, customer service teams often implement Kanban or good board way of doing it. It's a Japanese term to improve quality of manufacturing and software development. Okay, so scaled. We talked a little bit about that. That's agile, but very, very, very big projects. And essentially, when you take a look at those scrum teams of 6 or 8, you can make two scrum teams, three, four, five, 10, 100. But that's how you know, break up the work into groups. For example, in the one of the programs I'm running, in fact, the one I'm playing hooky for this class and having to be off site for 3 days to compress the schedule, actually has 65 scrum teams. So picture 65 teams of 6 to 12 people on a team, and we're going in and taking a look at those 65 teams, their work, and figuring out how to compress the schedule from 18 months down to 9 months. So, you know, Agile can become very large, and there's different ways you organize that for the bigger teams. Now, um, so when you look at it, when I look at those 65 teams, I have a scrum master on each of those 65 teams. I often group them into these 6 teams are doing similar work. I put them under a program manager. These other 8 teams are doing similar work. I put those under a program manager, and then I orchestrate across all of that. So this can become very large, very complicated, and you could lose a lot of hair because of it. But it's definitely a great feeling. So when we take a look at running multiple teams, when I talked to you about quarterly planning, you plan out 6 sprints at a time. On these larger projects, you may have dozens of teams building out 6 sprints at a time, and there may be dependencies across the team. The unicorns may be developing a website, but may be dependent upon the tigers deploying servers to support the website. So there are interdependencies all the way throughout these larger projects you have to monitor. So we talked a little bit about project management. Program management is the next level. Portfolio management gets a little bit bigger, but they are all the same concepts. So if you understand how to manage your project, you will understand how to manage larger initiatives like this and be very successful. Okay, so concerns, limitations. Yeah, Agile doesn't work for all projects. There are certain types of projects that works better toward common projects, projects with uncertainty, etc. When they get larger, uh, they become not that simple. There's a lot of moving parts you have to be able to do. Um, it's based upon the concept of uncertainty. Now, many companies don't like uncertainty. You go to a CFO and say, "Hey, I need $1 million to do this project over a year. I don't really know what we're delivering, but I know I need about $1 million. Trust me, it'll be great." CFOs don't like that. So Agile does have that little bit of a challenge that you have to be able to prove the value. And that's why you do that incremental releasing each 2 weeks to show value. No, doesn't satisfy top management's need for control. Um, a lot of people are concerned about scope creep. And if a sponsor is changing their mind every 2 weeks, then there are other things you need to worry about to be able to do it. And you know involvement from the team and the customer working together is very, very critical. So a lot of companies do hybrid models. They may implement, waterfall for some projects, agile for others, hybrid or Kanban for others. There's nothing wrong with that. Again, as I mentioned, these are just different tools in your toolbox to be able to become more effective. The more you learn, the more effective you can be. And with that, a couple of the key terms we talked about: waterfall, we talked about backlogs, features, hybrid models, scrum masters, which are project managers, agile project versus extreme programming, the role of a product owner. There's a whole world of e- areas of learning around agile. Again, um, these are great opportunities for you to continue your education as you go wrap up, your experience at ECPI, as you're going out into the working world, as you become a project manager or become a leader. These are all great tools for you to learn. And with that, I'm officially wrapped up the last piece of information. Oh, I forgot to tell you the super secret code word I mentioned at the beginning. Please email me this just so I know you suffered through the 2.5 hours worth of video lectures. Um, so the secret code word, email me, is based upon Douglas Adams. For those of you who don't know him, he's the author for the Hitchhiker's Guide to the universe. So with that, life, the universe, and everything, including project management, the answer to is 42. So email me the number 42, and I know you made it through this. Um, so with that, everybody, again, a true honor and privilege to spend the last 5 weeks with you, to learn more about you, your career. Um, I want to thank everybody for their interaction, their participation. Feel free, to reach out to me if you have questions in this last week. Feel free to reach out to me if you have questions as you go forward in your career. The world is about the connections you make, the lives you can impact and change. And, I'd love to be able to see how you guys do in the future. So don't be a stranger. Guys, thank you. Finish your work. Please submit everything by December 10th before midnight so I can get everything graded and turned in. And have a wonderful holiday season coming up and a very safe new year. Thank you guys. And I'll see you in my office hours if you have any questions on Thursday or Saturday. Okay. Good night.